wildlife, tourism and travel in a post-pandemic world. They'll be in conversation with Malavika Banerjee. But first, we'd like to launch Bikram's book, Wildlife in India, and I'd like to invite Ms. Panchami on stage, please. Ms. Panchami Manokil to help us launch the book. She's been with us in our past festivals as well, and it's a pleasure to have her here with us.
Thank you.
Can you give her a mic, please? Panchami, thank you very much for agreeing to release this book. This is my 37th book I just figured out, with a couple of years of pandemic in between. Thank you so much for coming.
Many congratulations to Mr. Bikram Grewal. He has by far been the most prolific writer of books on birds and wildlife. And as an educator, nothing gives me greater pleasure than to be a part of the release of this wonderful book on the wildlife of India. I thank Malavika and the team at Bhubaneswar Literary Fest for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. There is, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, everybody. Malavika, will you come on stage, please? The reason I wrote this book was that people like Panchami, you would always complain that when they go to the forest, should I sit at the center? That when we go to the forest, we have to carry 5 or 6 books. One book's on mammals, one book on birds, one on reptiles, one on trees. So what I thought I'd do was, to save everybody the bother, is to combine all the major players in the sector and bring out one book. And this is that book. It has a total of about 1,200, 1,300 species of mammals, of reptiles, of insects, of butterflies. And the first section of the book is on how to behave. We have a big problem in India that humne to tiger dekhna hai. And you go to a forest and you see a tiger and you end your holiday and you say, ji sab kuch ho gaya. But the thing is that the forest has so much more to offer. It has trees, it has insects, it has birds, it has anything that you want. And the way the soil works, the way the mushrooms work, what are the interactions. Even the guides who show you around are not really interested in all of this. They also are interested in getting their tips, going home early. So this is the book that I came out. I work with guides all over this country. The first thing I try and teach them is that there is so much more to the forest than just a tiger. And I hope it works. It's a new book. Books have been in a bit of a problem in the last couple of years because of the pandemic. This book has just been released. In fact, the copies haven't come in yet. I just got one advance copy to show you. And I'll be very happy to answer any questions, Malavika, if you have.
So, in fact, you've answered part of my first question about why this book has been produced and written by you, because there are many books out there on wildlife and on wildlife in India. So you've answered partly the fact that, I think it's just we as a people, we like to talk about the main thing. Did you go to Tadoba? Did you see the tiger? And if the answer is no, your trip is considered to be a hideous waste. So would you say that books like this, besides showcasing the wildlife of India or any place, also should kind of teach one how to interact with nature on such holidays? It's not just about the big cats, it's about their habitat, the smaller animals, the birds. So do we also need to learn how to enjoy these holidays?
Well, that certainly is the aim and intention of this book, that you learn from as many diverse species as possible. But if you even see a tiger, how do you know? Other than the obvious reason is whether it's a male tiger, whether it's a female tiger, does size matter? Is there coloration involved? What is a black panther? Is there a species called a black panther? What is the difference between a deer and an antelope? These are all many, many questions. And if you get into the bird world, of which there are either 1,350 species or 1,400 species, depending on which book you do, then it becomes very complicated, because in some cases the sexes are alike, the birds, the male, females look similar. In some cases they look totally different. And that comes with experience, it comes with understanding, it comes with this thing. But we have separate books on birds, not very well illustrated. We have separate books on mammals, some good ones. We have different books on trees. But to integrate it together, I hope is a first attempt, and I hope a successful one.
That's wonderful. So now I'll welcome Avinash, who's been to the festival before. Thank you for being here. Is it possible to just run the slides which Avinash gave us earlier? Shumit, do we have them ready? Yes. So these are some of the incredible photographs that Avinash can talk us through.
Let me just quickly interject that Avinash's book on Mangla Jodi, magical Mangla Jodi, that wonderful wetland near Bhubaneswar, should be out by the end of this month. And if you have a chance, just drop everything and go and pick up a copy. It's certainly worth it. I saw the proofs last night, and it's quite mind-boggling.
Thank you, sir.
Can you start the slides? Yes. Here. Can you go a little slower, please? Yeah, you can now move, yes.
These are all from Chilika, Mangla Jodi, and Bhitarkanika. Take another 2-3 minutes.
I think now we can just start a bit of the conversation. So talk us through this book and these hidden beauties of Odisha. I'm sure people in Odisha are very aware of them, but for someone coming from outside and just the neighboring state, we hear of Chilika and Simlipal, but I didn't know about this place. So can you just tell us more about it?
Yeah. So, this book that is coming up this month, the name is The Magic of Mangalajodi. It's about a place which is the northwestern shore of Chelika. It's a wetland with an average of 1 to 2 feet of water year round. And because of the shallow depth of water, it has an abundance of fish, frogs, snakes, and insects. Snakes obviously non-venomous. And this is why it attracts lakhs and lakhs of birds from all over Asia, parts of Europe in winters. There are resident birds as well. And many people do not know that it is only 70 kilometers away from Bhubaneswar, only 1.5 hours drive. And those who go for photography remember it as a place known for birds, but it is also one of the most beautiful places for magical sunrises and sunsets. And a ride in a country boat, getting immersed in the habitat and going very near to the birds and getting a eye level or water level perspective, it makes Mangalajodi unique. And if we say one of the most unique and well-known conservation stories in the world is the conservation story of Mangalajodi. How people turn from poachers to protectors over there. So it's a very amazing place. And then there are a few photographs about another place called Bhitarkanika. It's like a mini Sundarbans. It's a mangrove forest very near to Bhubaneswar, only 170 kilometers. And it's a unique place. You find reptiles, you find amphibians, you find mammals, you find dark nights to shoot star trails and Milky Ways. And the most amazing thing is bioluminescence. The best of the bioluminescence you experience anywhere in the world, you get it in Habalikati, which is a part of Bhitarkanika. I was there last year and last year, and when you stand on a dark night on the beaches and the bioluminescence starts happening, you feel if somebody has fitted neon lights in the waves of the sea. And you have to see it to believe. Amazing. That's really amazing.
So the seeing is to believing. This is what Bikram and I, when we first thought about this session, is we haven't been seeing and we haven't been listening for the last so many years. And one of the things that the pandemic did was just make us stop and see and listen. And I'm from Calcutta, and there are people from even larger urban agglomerations all over the world who said they were hearing bird song for the first time in their lives because traffic had stopped, the airplanes had stopped. There was just silence enough for the birds to finally be heard. So to broad base that into a conversation on the way we Indians look at travel, do you think the pandemic has made, I'll ask Bikram first, Indians more interested in their, in their national parks? They're all there. You hear more people wanting to go to a Tadoba, to a Simlipal, of course, Sariska, so Bharatpur. So the typical seaside resort holidays are changing into a kind of engagement with nature. So do you see this, is this something that's going to last?
Two things happened. One is that before the pandemic, there was a rise in Indian tourism of the wildlife nature or of the beat nature, as opposed to going to Europe and do shopping. And as the GDP fell in India, started falling well before the pandemic came, people started going to Indian destinations. Now, Indian destinations can mean anything. You go to Corbett, you can get a room for 300 rupees, and you can get a room for 70,000 rupees. But let's say there are 70,000 tourists in the city in one day in Corbett, but you're only allowed 2,000 inside. Who gets in? Is the person who pays 70,000 have the right to go in, or does the person who pays 300 rupees has an equal right of going in? So that's a big trauma everywhere else. The contrary to what I said was, over the years, lots of people, including techies who went to Bangalore, started jobs, started earning well, all ended up with a camera, a digital camera, and they ended up with an SUV. So what do? You have a 10 lakh rupee camera, you have a 20 lakh SUV. You have to do something with it. And what better than going and photographing game? So everybody went, photographed tigers. Now everybody's got thousands of tiger pictures, they don't know what to do with them. And as I write in my book, that, tigers is a very minuscule part of your jungle experience. So with people going in, there was a lull because of pandemic that hopefully is coming to an end now. I see rooms getting tougher to get and places difficult to book over the Holy weekend. So yes, I think that there is certainly a move from what we call, going to Spain or going to France and eating holidays to now to see wildlife holidays.
Someone told me that techies really love wildlife photography because, like in their day job, they have to sit very still and just look at one spot. So perhaps you have your captive audience in that. But tell me, wildlife photography, as Bikram said, there's the camera, there's the SUV, and then is it a fad, as some of that would suggest, or are people genuinely enjoying it? Do you see youngsters wanting to know more? Is a more evolved engagement with wildlife photography slowly developing in India?
If we see, it gained momentum when these, as Bikram sir rightly said, these techies coming into wildlife photography, buying SUVs and DSLRs. That was the initial phase. They were young and they had disposable income, so they spent on DSLRs and SUVs, and they also spent on trips to nearby national parks and sanctuaries. But then the moment they went there, they spent their time, as it happened with me as well. My first trip was to Kabini, Jungle Lodges and Resorts. And suddenly I found myself in the midst of nature with lovely bird songs, fresh air, woods. And I was like, wow, this world also exists. So this happens with everyone. And the moment they do photography, they keep themselves busy in that field. We shoot in the morning, in the evening, and in the afternoon and late evening we review those photos. So there is no boredom into it. And the more we get into it, then we get to know about the species, the behavior, the interaction between them, and we gain a lot of knowledge, and then we gain a lot of interest about it. This is how people are now more and more going into. If you see earlier, Corbett, Ranthambore, Bandhavgarh, Kanha, Tadoba, these were the places where people used to go. And now they go to other lesser known places also. If I speak of Orissa, Kuldiha, Bhetnoi, Bhitarkanika. Bhitarkanika is a place very few people knew about 7-8 years back. And now in the season it's almost full. Even in summers it's full. People love to spend time there, and the experience that it offers, it's very unique.
You also have the turtle breeding in that area, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have the Arabida and
Aribada.
Aribada.
So Orissa's beaches are the world's largest nesting sites, world's largest. nesting sites for the olive ridley turtles in Gahirmatha, which is in Bhitarkanika, and then Devi river mouth and Rusikulya river mouth. Gahirmatha is sort of out of bounds for the common people because of presence of defense establishments over there. But Rusikulya, everyone can go, and it's one of the greatest wildlife spectacle in the world, like the Great Migration in Tanzania and Kenya. The same way, Aribada in Orissa. So, and when people go and see it, they understand what it is. And that is how the interest generates and the word spreads.
So now we'll talk about the state's tourism specifically, you know, after the broader discussion about wildlife in India and, you know, photography. So what do you think the tourism map of Odisha is looking like right now? How is the health of the industry? Do you think there's a lot of potential for people from neighboring states outside India, Southeast Asia?
Let me answer before Avinash does. Is that, you know, Odisha was never known as a great place for wildlife tourism. You could go to Simlipal, you could go to, let's say, Chilika, but to go to Kabini, for instance, or go to Karnataka, which has a forest department-based hotel hospitality service called Jungle Resorts, JLR or JRL or something like that, where they have hotels, small hotels, affordable hotels run by very knowledgeable guides. And you can go to Dandeli or you can go to any one of these places where they have specialist trained guides. You can see tigers, you can see leopards, you can see black panthers, you can see birds, you can do specialist stuff. And there are hundreds of them. And they're all reasonably priced, and they're all in our major wildlife areas. Unfortunately, in Orissa, till some time back, this did not exist. Like it did not exist in many states. It started now in Uttarakhand, and started now in... if you go to UP, you can't go for wildlife tourism unless you go to Kana, which is very, very far away and very, very expensive. Go to Punjab. There's certainly no place to stay in a place called Harike, which is the only place in Punjab where you can watch birds. And even if you go to Sultanpur in Haryana, there isn't anything that is worth it. So Orissa was like that, but now I have seen a little bit changes taking place. They have decided, they have found that wildlife tourism is indeed a huge potential. And everything else was earlier temple-based or religion-based, but now they're saying that it can be forest-based as well. And if it adds to your revenue, why not go for it? I don't know, Avinash, what do you think about it?
Yes, sir. Before 2016, not many places in Orissa were known for wildlife and biodiversity, in spite of the fact that Orissa is extremely rich in biogeographic diversity. In fact, Orissa is sitting at the confluence of Chota Nagpur Plateau and the Eastern Ghats, and that makes it intensely and immensely rich in the diverse landscapes like dense forested hills, high rolling uplands, large perennial rivers and small rivulets, waterfalls, meadows, grasslands, valleys, gorges, and amazing diversity of flora and fauna, which are very similar to those of Northeast, some similar to Himalayas and some similar to Western Ghats. What the government of Orissa through Ministry of Environment and Forests did in 2016 is to set up eco-tourist nature camps in different places in Orissa, set up eco-development committees, train the local villagers over there who depended on forests for their livelihood, gave them training, involved them, did it on a revenue sharing model. And today, right from Sundargarh in the north, go down to Debrigarh, go down to Malkangiri, Fulbani, Daringbadi, Bhanjanagar, Bhetnoi, of course Rambha, Chilika, Badkul, then come to Bhitarkanika, Balasore. There are 44 nature camps of ecotourism in Orissa. And all of them are run by the government in collaboration with the local people over there through the eco development committees. And the revenue goes, a share of the revenue goes to the local villagers, and they run full during seasons. Odisha government has started doing very great, and add to this eco retreat thing by the tourism department also.
So this is, you spoke about spiritual tourism slowly being replaced, which is great. But what typically happens, and this is peculiar to Bengal and Orissa and possibly the East, is what Bikram alluded to about the various budgets of tourists, and it's unique to game reserve, etc., where access is critical. So do you think, how do you think a balance can be placed put in place where all kinds of tourism, the tourists it should be a democratizing process, so, and not too many people as well. So what are the challenges for ecotourism, wildlife tourism?
Orissa has done a tremendous job. If we say they have put up everything online, and the tariff is extremely reasonable. Any category of tourists can come into Orissa, spend time. I remember 7-8 years back, we used to approach the forest department, get an offline hard copy of a booking. Now everything is seamless. Everything is transparent and online. So anybody's...
Of the various...
And they are very reasonable. If you talk the tariff of a room, including food, for 2 people starts from around say 2,500, 3,000 rupees per room per night for 2 people, and goes up to 5,000-6,000 rupees, which is extremely reasonable.
Well, what you were trying to say is the most expensive part of wildlife tourism is the travel component. If you take your car in, if you take your jeep in, you have to pay a certain amount. So is there ways of reducing that? Is it the ways of maybe getting a big bus or something to enter with many more people who will come, and you can amortize the costs of, petrol? Because most people would love to go there, but they can't afford to pay 1,600, 1,700 per trip, to enter the forest. And if you're rich enough, you can then hire your own. But if you're somebody who is reasonably okay and can't, then what do you do?
See, if I talk about Mangla Jodi, 1,200 rupees for 4 people for one ride of 3 to 4 hours. It's reasonable. If you talk about Bhitarkanika, 20 people, 3,000 rupees for 4 hours, for full day actually. 2 rides.
For 20 people?
20 people.
Oh, that's very good.
And it's the same thing everywhere. If you compare Orissa cost of wildlife tourism with that of Corbett or Kanha or Ranthambore or Bandhavgarh, Tadoba, it's very reasonable, very cheap in Orissa. And it's very easy for people to secure a booking and go.
May it remain so. But tell me, in Orissa, other than these 4 or 5 places that we keep talking about, Chilika, Simlipal, which less and less people are going, Gahir Matha, Rishikulia, there is a huge amount of other forests that we don't even talk about. In Koraput, in interior Odisha, in South Odisha, is there nothing we can do to encourage tourism there? Encourage wildlife tourism there?
That is what I said. There are I am talking about only Bhitarkanika or Chilika or Mangla Jodi, but Vichitrapur in Balasore. Debrigad in Sambalpur.
Is that where the saris are from? I'm sorry to digress so terribly. Okay.
So, it's your favorite subject, I believe. And then you go to Daringbadi and Fulbani. You go to Sanaghagara in Keonjhar. You go to Taptapani in Ganjam. So almost in all districts, all 30 districts, you will find 1 or 2 nature camps. Each one gives you a different experience altogether. Somewhere you get dense forest, somewhere you get highland plateaus, somewhere you get mangrove forests, somewhere you get wetlands, waterfalls somewhere. Very diverse, very accessible, very reasonable.
So I was thinking this is a good time to also ask people to, engage in the conversation. Do you have any questions? Yeah, because I can see people do have some questions. We'll first let the gentleman go, then Panchami, please.
Yeah, so I've got a very fundamental question which may be slightly contrarian to what you're speaking about. My question is, does eco and tourism, can they really coexist in the Indian context? Because we've seen the kind of devastation which is going on. I come from Bangalore, we were speaking just before the function. So the kind of devastation to the eco from the tourists is so strong. So that was my question, how do we handle this in the Indian context?
You're not the only one who asked this question. More and more people are asking that is there a thing called ecotourism and can they go indeed hand in hand? The question is that this is very much the endeavor. It doesn't always succeed. The trouble with, you go to a forest, which you do, you just told me, you go and see people, very much like the Bengalis do in Sundarbans. They play their music loudly, they have what in the Sundarbans, they have something called the booze cruise, which is you go to on a boat, you get drunk and you fall off and get eaten by a crocodile. So,
he makes it sound so cheerful.
That is not the intention. The intention is like Avinash was saying that you do ecotourism. That means you talk about other things. It's, you do not play it loudly. Your food is simple. It's sustainable. It's homegrown as far as possible. And you take it onto that kind of thing. Instead of leaving cigarette butts and pan bidis all over the place, which is happening all over the place. Children go. So when you go to a forest, nobody even talks to you about anything. What clothes to wear, what colored clothes to wear, for instance. How to behave, how to sit still, how not to jump around. This should be mandatory for every single person entering a forest. And how long does it take, really, for somebody to enforce or tell you about these things and then enforce it? It takes a 5 minutes job. But the child will go from one jeep to the other, jumping around, and they think that it's like a zoo. It isn't.
Also what he's trying to allude to is the indiscriminate way tourism can then explode. Because we've seen it at religious spots in the hills, where you've had massive floods and other catastrophes.
And
So if you say, okay, this is a great place, this is one of the most unique spots of biodiversity in the world, and then business tourism opportunists, to use a slightly derogatory term, will flood the place. How do you stop that indiscriminate explosion of business, and how would that affect the ecological balance of the place?
Well, not only that, they're man-made. If you go to Ranthambore, there's a temple in between, inside the forest, which has its mela. And I have seen people in the droves, in the hundreds, walk to that temple. And this is the heart of the tiger country.
That is possible, but even that wouldn't be as devastating as building cement
No,
agglomerations.
that is what happened in Kedarnath.
Yes, so do you think that can happen here, or is there a sense of having learned from other people's mistakes?
Well, if we take it to a slightly logical extension of it, that is wildlife trade. That is killing of wildlife for food and the cutting down of wood, cutting down of trees for wood. And that goes on unabated, I'm afraid. And Orissa is very much a part of it. We can gloss over it, but the point is that the wild meat trade in Orissa is very rampant. you know, cutting trees might not be that rampant, but it does happen. Because you have huge forests. If you go to Simlipal, you see some of the magnolia, champaka trees there. I've never seen trees that size. And you go there next year or year after and it's gone. Because your one tree costs you something. So there is a socio-political nexus into this.
My question is for Mr. Grewal. Both of you touched upon the role of local communities as being very critical for habitat conservation and for ecotourism. So do you feel that the concept of cocoon conservancies needs to be taken up on a much more serious note than what it is being taken up today?
I couldn't agree with you more. I've experimented with cocoon conservancy in Maharashtra. It's worked. What happens is that when you prevent a man from being a poacher, be a poacher of meat or be a poacher of wood, you have to supply him an alternate existence. You have to provide an alternative means of income. So you make him a part of what, let's say a hotel chain. We have places at the edges of forest, which are not fertile or maybe fertile but cannot be because of various reasons, because of, you know, wild animals, because of deer, you can't cultivate. So what you do is you get, let's say 500 villagers together and say that you will continue to own the land and we will pay you lease this land from you. So I have land which I have turned wild. And with my land turning wild and being protected, things like tigers and others will start coming in. I have a few huts. Whichever hut, you might have a basic hut, you might have a fancy hut. You have places to stay. But what has happened is that the local villager has got employment. Either he's a cleaner, or he's a cook, or his wife is a cook, or the vegetables grown at his patch are being sold at your place. Local handicrafts are getting, a boost. So, what you're saying is completely correct. That unless we involve the society in it, or the locals in it, or the cocoon conservancy element into it, I don't think we can succeed. And it has started. It started in a much more wilder thing, in a bigger way than we think. The trouble is that a lot of people go and start cocoon conservancy with good intentions and talk themselves to the villagers. And once they get hold of the land, they become like any other businessman and run it like any other show. And they're not devoted to the local people. So like all good things in India, there are people
There's a yin and a yang.
There's a yin and a yang.
Yes.
Yes.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
Hello. Yeah. This is Sujit. Sir, Bikram sir, I was quite intrigued by your use of the term game, which comes from the colonial sport of hunting.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, that got me thinking, because when people go to photograph wildlife in the jungles, they're actually going from the perspective of trophy. So if you catch a tiger on camera, that's a
And
trophy.
you're still shooting.
Yeah, you're still shooting, of course. The language comes from there. Now, my question here is, I did some research on Corbett, and my argument was that what changed Corbett from a hunter to a wildlife or conservationist was when he made his entry as a photographer. And in fact, all the early wildlife photographers were hunters, because that's how they could track and capture animals. Now, the question is, when everyone with a techies or non-techies with a DSLR going into the jungle to capture wildlife as a trophy, does that also make them into environmentalists, or does it just remain as a consumption trophy level? Does it help the cause of wildlife and environment with all these wannabe wildlifers getting in?
It certainly doesn't do it any harm. Though being a photographer can be harmful in the sense, I know various people in Bangalore who photograph a nesting bird and then destroy the nest of the bird and the nestling so that nobody else can photograph it.
brutal.
It's brutal. So that happens. I know of people who go photograph let's say, drinking tiger. And when they leave, after they've got it, they will shoo it away. So that Avinash, who comes next, doesn't get a chance to do it. So a lot of that happens.
Are you sure these are not media people?
No, not media people. These are bird watchers. But your thing was when you say no, shooting game. Well, game was a name for wildlife at one point. You had big game shooting. You had small game shooting. You had antlered game shooting. And your very interesting story about Corbett taking his rifle down and picking up the camera is from a chap called F.W. Champion, who probably wrote two of the best wildlife books in India. One is called In a Tiger with a camera in Tigerland and Jungle in Sunlight and Shadows. Whatever you do, try and get a copy of the book from your library. Unfortunately, they're out of print. But read it just how a book should be written. It's brilliant. He was the conservation of forest in what was then Uttar Pradesh, or United Provinces, and took the first car up to Kanda and did a lot of interesting things. But these two books are a pure must. And he's the one who is sort of, it is said that he's the one who converted. Whether Corbett himself gave up the rifle for the camera totally is something I'm not very sure of. I still think it's a bit contentious.
Okay, I think that area of grayness is a wonderful time to end this discussion. It's always wonderful to have Bikram and Avinash with us, and of course a conversation on the wildlife is something that actually brings a sense of solace. Seeing those photographs is a deeply peaceful experience. So may you keep shooting with a camera, of course, and may you keep writing, Bikram. Thank you so much.
And Avinash, best of luck for your new book. It's as beautiful as the place is.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mal.
Catalog tare baba.